Nigeria, often referred to as the Giant of Africa, has a history marked by both triumph and tragedy. One of the most significant chapters in that history is the Biafra War, fought between 1967 and 1970. The conflict emerged from Nigeria's complex ethnic and political landscape and drew global attention, particularly for the devastating famine that struck the secessionist state of Biafra. This was described as the world's first televised war. Images of starving children and war-torn communities reached millions of households, leaving a lasting impression of the human cost of civil conflict. Estimates suggest that between 1 and 3 million people lost their lives, most of them to starvation, in what became one of the largest humanitarian crises of the 20th century. In this documentary, we will explore the origins of the war, how it unfolded, and the lasting impact it had on Nigeria. Stay with us as we uncover this critical moment in history. Nigeria, as a unified territory, was created in 1914 when the British colonial administration amalgamated its holdings in the region. After gaining independence in 1960, the country was hailed as one of the most promising post-colonial states in sub-Saharan Africa. With a population of roughly 45 million people and newly discovered reserves of high-quality oil, Nigeria seemed to hold limitless potential for political stability and economic growth. Yet the legacy of colonial rule remained deeply entrenched. The territorial and ethnic boundaries established under British control were left intact at independence. Organized as a federal state, Nigeria was divided into 3 main regions, each dominated by a major ethnic group: the Hausa Fulani in the north, the Yoruba in the west, and the Igbo in the east. These divisions were further complicated by religion. The north was overwhelmingly Muslim, the east predominantly Christian, while the west had significant populations of both. Such a mix often placed communities at odds with one another, and the tensions between them continued to shape Nigeria's fragile political order. The lack of cultural integration soon gave rise to political rivalry, as most political parties were organized along regional and ethnic lines. This politicization of ethnicity, combined with competition for resources, fostered widespread nepotism and tribalism, often at the expense of national unity. The situation reached a breaking point in 1966, when a series of military coups destabilized the country. The chain of events that set the stage for the Nigeria-Biafra War began with a coup in January 1966, followed by a counter-coup in July of the same year. The first coup was largely carried out by military officers of Igbo and Yoruba origin, who declared that their goal was to create a more united Nigeria. They condemned corruption, nepotism, ethnic favoritism, and the looting of public wealth, while promising a fairer system that would provide equal opportunity to all citizens.
I will hate tomorrow, when the war is over, and we sit around the table with an Igbo officer, and he asks, "What is that medal?" And I say, "It is the Okiwe medal, it is the Umahi medal, it is Onitsha medal, it is Enugu medal, it is Port Harcourt medal, and that this is the war for, the war against, the Igbos." They said, we hate to sort of have that sort of feeling, because it will make the child feel as though, he's a conquered sort of person.
In carrying out their mission, the coup plotters assassinated several of Nigeria's leading political figures. Among those killed were Prime Minister Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Amadu Bello, and the Premier of the Western Region, Samuel Ladoka Akintola. The Minister of Finance, along with several senior military officers, many of whom were Hausa Fulani and Yoruba, were also killed during the uprising. The January coup, led primarily by Igbo officers, only intensified suspicions among the Hausa Fulani and Yoruba populations. Tensions rose further under the leadership of General Johnson Thomas Ironsi, whose government quickly became associated with corruption, nepotism, and ethnic favoritism. Alarmed by these developments, northern and western military officers organised a counter-coup on July 29, 1966, overthrowing General Ironsi and installing General Yakubu Gowon as head of state. General Gowon's background as neither Hausa nor Fulani, and not being of the Islamic faith, made him a relatively neutral choice to lead a nation strained by ethnic divisions. Yet even under his leadership, the aftermath of the counter-coup saw horrific violence. In northern Nigeria, Hausa Fulani groups massacred Christian Igbo communities, prompting tens of thousands to flee eastward to territories dominated by their own ethnic group. Many Igbos came to doubt whether they could survive or thrive under a federal government perceived as hostile and oppressive. On May 30th, 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, together with other representatives of the eastern region, declared the independence of the Republic of Biafra, encompassing several eastern states. This new republic symbolized the nationalist aspirations of the Igbo people, whose leaders believed coexistence with the northern-dominated federal government was no longer possible. Colonel Ojukwu himself was a figure shaped by privilege and education. Born to a wealthy family, he studied history at Oxford University before returning to Nigeria in 1955. He later joined the military and eventually became the military governor of Nigeria's eastern region. When he announced the creation of Biafra, it was met with immediate opposition from the federal government. General Yakubu Gowon, leading Nigeria's military at the time, refused to recognize the secession, setting the stage for a devastating civil war. When hostilities erupted in July 1967, Biafran forces initially achieved notable success. By August, they had crossed the Niger River, captured Benin City, and were advancing toward Lagos. Their progress, however, was halted at Ora, a small town in what is now Ondo State. Despite these early gains, Nigeria's larger and better-equipped military gradually pushed Biafran forces back, reclaiming lost territory. If you've been enjoying this documentary so far, kindly subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future episodes. Shortly afterward, federal troops captured Enugu, the provincial capital of Biafra, penetrating the Igbo heartland. Within a year, Biafra was increasingly surrounded, with federal forces seizing coastal oil facilities and the strategic city of Port Harcourt. Over the next 2 years, the war became a grueling struggle. Biafran forces mounted stiff resistance within a shrinking enclave, but both soldiers and civilians suffered heavy casualties. Efforts at mediation by the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union, proved largely ineffective, even as Biafra gained recognition from other African nations and secured international humanitarian aid for its starving population. Meanwhile, the Nigerian Navy imposed a strict sea blockade, cutting off food, medical supplies and weapons, further worsening the plight of both soldiers and civilians. The humanitarian crisis deepened in June 1969, when the Nigerian government banned Red Cross food shipments to Biafra. By this time, hundreds of thousands were facing starvation, with estimates suggesting that 3,000 to 5,000 people were dying daily as a direct result of the blockade. The human toll of the conflict had become staggering, marking one of the most severe man-made famines of the 20th century. British policy during the conflict was heavily influenced by its economic interests, particularly in Nigeria's oil industry. At the time, investments by Shell and BP, then a joint company partially owned by the British government, were valued at nearly £200 million. As the largest producer of oil in Nigeria, most of Shell BP's operations were located in the Biafran region. This created a strong incentive for Britain to support the Nigerian federal government. Some British officials openly acknowledged the stakes, with one remarking that Shell has much to lose if the federal military government does not achieve the expected victory against Biafra. It was within this context that Britain supplied the Federal forces with significant military aid. The shipments included millions of rounds of ammunition, hundreds of machine guns and grenades, thousands of mortar and artillery shells, as well as aircraft and armoured personnel carriers. These deliveries were authorised even as evidence mounted that such weapons were being used not only in combat, but also against civilian populations. Britain's role, therefore, became a decisive factor in strengthening the federal government's position during the war. Over the course of the war, Biafra steadily shrank to just 1/10 of its original size. By 1968, it had lost access to the sea and was completely landlocked. With supplies restricted to airlifts, famine and disease spread rapidly across the enclave. Efforts by the Organisation of African Unity, the Pope, and other mediators to reconcile the opposing sides failed to produce results. Most countries continued to recognise General Yakubu Gowon's federal military government as the legitimate authority in Nigeria. However, by mid-1968, the international press was filled with images of starving Biafran children, and public sympathy abroad grew rapidly. Airlifts of food and medicine were organised by humanitarian groups, while several African states, including Ivory Coast, Gabon, Tanzania, and Zambia, formally recognised Biafra's independence. France also extended support, supplying weapons to the secessionist side. The final collapse of Biafra began on December 24, 1969, when federal forces launched a major offensive against an already weakened enemy. With ammunition exhausted and the population desperate for food, resistance quickly crumbled. On January 15, 1970, Colonel Ojukwu fled into exile in Ivory Coast, and the remaining Biafran commanders surrendered to the federal government. The Republic of Biafra ceased to exist. Ojukwu remained in exile for 13 years before receiving an official pardon. When he returned to Nigeria in 1982, crowds filled the streets of his home state of Anambra to welcome him. He later died in November 2011 and was given a full military burial, attended by then-President Goodluck Jonathan, African leaders, and foreign dignitaries. The end of the Biafran War left deep scars across Nigeria. Markets, schools, and homes lay in ruins, and entire communities faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives. The federal government's policy of granting every Igbo person with bank savings a flat sum of £20, regardless of what they had owned before the conflict, left many impoverished. For much of Nigeria, the war is remembered as a painful chapter best left in the past. Yet for the Igbo people who fought for secession, it remains a defining event that continues to shape collective memory. History such as this often lives on through personal stories. If you are Nigerian or have studied Nigerian history closely, we invite you to share your thoughts or any first-hand accounts you may know in the comments below. For those new to the channel, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future explorations of African and world history. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and share this video if you found it insightful. Until next time.